Well, if companies would make more relevant news, if they would just go out there and fail or get acquired or raise venture funding, sign major customers, and tell me about those things and not tell these guys, that'd be awesome. I mean, I think there's a lot of announcements that companies make that I'm glad to read about, but that aren't necessarily news. Again, I think it's a question of medium in a way. I'm actually more liable to pay attention to an email coming in from somebody, especially if that person is at the company rather than at an outside PR agency. There are a lot of pitches that come from outside PR people. If it's someone in the company, I tend to say, okay, this person is paying attention. I think, as much as we like to think that the world has changed in some way, in many ways it has, in many ways it's stayed the same. If you're engaged with the people you're trying to talk to, then they'll listen to you.
Yeah, and lie to us. I mean, there's nothing worse than you. No, seriously, you get a press release that the press release is in one font and Dear Dan is in a different font. You know what just happened there, and I'm probably not going to read it. Like, I mean, pay attention to the people you're actually trying to get in front of. If you really want to, sell us on something, pay attention to. I mean, yes, pay attention to us. Journalists don't get paid much, but we're extraordinarily narcissistic. So make us feel good that we're important, even if we're not, and we're more likely to cover you. Yeah. Also, by the way, you were talking about press releases that we don't cover. Here's one. Forbes magazine or Fortune magazine put you on a list of the 20. We don't give a damn. If we were interested, we read the list.
Right.
And
Your
we
VP
saw
of
you
Business
already.
Development is speaking at such and such a conference in Ohio. We don't care.
We do not.
We don't.
We do not. Unless we happen to be in Ohio covering that conference. Exactly. Maybe.
Maybe.
And then we have an agenda.
Nothing against Ohio.
All right, well, part of that may be issuing a press release for the SEO purpose, but as Paul said. But okay, so press release not dead yet. I think we can say that. What about press conferences? I think are pretty much dead. Would you?
Unless you're Apple.
Yeah.
Yeah, unless you're Apple or Microsoft even got 1 million people at its Windows 7 phone thing the other day. Or if you're a politician, obviously.
I love press conferences. Every time I go to a press conference, I get to see my colleagues. Most of the time, we're like, hiding behind desks or whatever. Bloggers, journalists. Everybody's going to be there. It's fun.
That kind of goes back to a question you asked earlier, Norman, about events and what's happening to events. And we've seen, of course, the collapse of virtually every major trade show certainly in the electronics industry. There's some left in some B2B markets, but events are going strongly online because the purpose of events for the companies exhibit there has always been a lead generation medium, and it's a very expensive way to generate leads. And so that's moving online because lead gen is much cheaper online than it is in events. So I would say that you need to look very carefully outside of something like a CES, where which is a major industry phenomenon, whether it's really worth it spending money at events anymore. You can generate leads much more cheaply in other ways.
Do the rest of you feel the same way, or?
I haven't been to a major trade show in forever. I mean, even in the private equity part of the industry I cover, the huge private equity conferences called ACG, or is the ACG conference that kind of goes around. I guess it was in Vegas last year, and I've stopped going to that because it just doesn't seem to make any sense. All that said, I mean, events, there's a million, God, tonight in Boston, and last night in Boston, and probably tomorrow in Boston, there's a million networking events and other events. Events have changed, I guess, from kind of traditional trade shows that has 1 or 2 big keynote speakers and a gazillion booths to really places just to go meet folks. And, clearly in Boston, in the tech community, that's going crazy. My old shop, we used to throw just basically beer at a bar and bring 500-600 people in. That stuff goes great. And if a sponsor is smart enough, they can do good things with that. I think of the parties we threw at PE Hub, and some people would sponsor it and their name would just get on the advertisements, and I thought that was kind of a waste. Some people would be really smart. They would give door prizes away, but that kind of linked into what they were doing. They would figure out some way to make me actually talk about them when I actually stood up and talked. There was ways to get involved. I guess sponsors have to be a little bit more original. Just being one of 80 booths in a big hallway at a hotel, it doesn't seem to make any sense anymore. Maybe it never did.
But where do startups fit into this? If you've got a company that's running on presumably a pretty lean budget, Does it make sense for them to go to an event and set up a booth at a trade show? Or to
I
hire a press, public relations company, all these expensive things that you might do to get exposure?
hire a PR company. The PR company. I think it depends on who the PR company is. No, I'm serious. No, I'm serious, Galen. Aren't there certain PR people who for years, for whatever reason, maybe it's because of a story you once worked on that you've got a good relationship with,
Yeah.
and you're more likely to take their call, and you might
That's
even be more
absolutely
willing to write about their story because it's them who called you.
Even though you'd like it to not be so, yes.
Yeah, it's exactly so. I think, if I was hiring a PR agency or was thinking about it, the question I would ask, and I guess it's hard to quantify, is not just, who would, this is my story, who would you pitch it to? And show me stories that person's written on your clients in the past, actual stories, to prove that they can get a phone call returned and can actually get something written about them.
Okay, but you're a lean startup. Is press like that, should it really be part of your mission? Should it be
It depends on
something
what
that
you
you're
are.
spending money on?
Yeah, I think it depends on who you are. If you're a Web 2.0 consumer internet company and that person says that we can get you on TechCrunch, yeah, I think it's probably worth it. Again, it depends on who you are. If you're creating the next cancer drug and you're
Right.
not even in phase 1 trials, no, it's probably not worth it.
Well, I mean, that's one of the interesting things about social media is that, different clients, different companies are at different stages and have a different culture, and some are really ready for social media, and some, we had a client who said, oh, we want to write a blog, and we said, okay, take a notebook, write down everything you're thinking about as a blog idea, and see if you really have what it takes. And after 3 weeks, he said, he came up with 3 ideas and his grocery list. So, some organizations are not ready for that. But
That's because they're not being coached appropriately in how to generate ideas. The fact is, we could sit here and in 10 minutes, I think we could come up with 20 ideas for how to make your grocery list interesting. If we really worked that angle and looked at it different ways. The problem is not that people don't have things to talk about. They're starting companies. They're doing interesting things. They have interesting people. They're creative. There's all kinds of stuff that's going on with the startup company. They don't know what to say because they're not being coached appropriately in how to create a distinctive voice and differentiated voice. And that's why most companies should have blogs. Most startup companies should have blogs. It's almost a no-brainer to me. If you want to get visibility, tell people about what you're doing. It's pretty easy. What is hard for people is coming up with an angle, which, by the way, all the people on this panel are professionals at doing. We come up with angles. It's something that they have to be coached in, and I think that the job of a good PR agency these days is to teach their clients how to create a distinctive and unique voice.
In some ways, it's not just the traditional role of PR, which is to find out the interesting stories from the organization, bring them out, make a press release about them, pitch them to a publication, do whatever, but more of sort of a coaching the people inside, saying how can you tell this story without me being really involved at all, other than that I'm sort of helping you tell it.
Yeah, I'd say, I think the key is really getting the storytelling aspect of the company. Some companies just have stories that are really gripping to us as journalists, and they're easy to tell, and they're entertaining in some way, and they have a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's that, and then I think establishing the personal relationship with the journalists, which is tough to do in this day and age where there's so much turnover, both on the PR side and the journalist side. But in the end, it comes down to the face-to-face, and that's where I think the conferences and the networking is never going to die.
I'll also say, and show us the thing. I don't know how many people here are doing internet sort of stuff, but if it is something you can see, that you can show somebody, if you've already called the reporter, forget about the stealth thing, because you're theoretically telling them what you're doing. Create a crappy YouTube video showing what I think of the example. What's the company with the pen, with the smart pen? Who is that?
That takes notes and remembers
Yeah,
what
that
you wrote.
Scribe. When they launched, they had a video. It was really fairly. It wasn't terribly well made. They now have a really fancy one with animation. But they had a very basic video which actually showed this thing working, and it was fascinating because it was novel, it was new, and it's true. A picture tells 1,000 words. A video tells, I guess, 1,000,000 words. And it was 30 seconds, 60 seconds. It drew you in. And if you have a product that somebody can see, show it to them. And maybe that means walking them through your beta, even if they don't have access to it, but even just a video, even just a clip, if it's a private one, show them that. It's going to become more compelling. And Greg's right. The story, tell them why you started the company, not just there's a market here and I saw it, but, give some backstory. We're always looking, the thing about reporters is the second, the third, the fourth paragraphs are always easy. It's the lead that's usually the hardest thing. How do you lead it? If you give us something to lead with, then that's gonna be helpful.
I think Greg hit on a key point, which is it's about stories. It's about telling stories. And it's easy if you have a technology like a smart pen. The hard thing is if you're starting an insurance agency in your local town. How do you differentiate that? Well, chances are there the story is the people. How do you tell stories about the people who work for you, the people that who are your customers, the community that you deal with? The stories are there. It's a matter of pulling them out and acknowledging that these can be interesting to others. And today you have a way to tell them yourself.
So that leads to another question. It's not about anything dying or dead. Not everything has to be morbid, but the question is, what do you look for in a story beyond the backstory? Are there also multimedia elements that you're looking for that help tell the story for you, and are you using those in your own reporting?
I'm looking to do two things. I'm looking to add value to information, or I'm looking to destroy value in information. Adding value is very simple. It's when I take 2 or 3 pieces of information and I put them together and I say there's a trend here. Or, for example, more small companies are getting funded. I show a few examples. I show some data, right? I pull together those disparate pieces of information. The sum is greater than the value of its parts. But on the other side, destroying value in information, that's when I know something that not very many people know. You look at, for example, the thing with the Moss trade, right? ESPN reporter finds out about it. He knows it. Well, he's probably not the first person to find out about it. Randy
He
Moss
found out
probably.
before Moss, I think.
Is that right?
He seemed to.
Right? So, in any situation like that, let's say I find out that ITA is being sold to Google. Well, the folks at ITA probably know, the folks at Google probably know, and there's probably a cluster of people around there that know. The cluster of people around there, they have something very valuable. They know something before anyone else knows it. They can move on it. It affects the shape of their industry, right? Well, my job as a journalist is to take that value and destroy it, right? I learn of that thing from somebody tells me, I tell the world, right? And now that value's gone. Everyone knows. So it's either adding value to information or removing it. Those are the two things that I look for. If I can get an opportunity to do either of those things, I'm going to write a story.
You asked about multimedia. For me, it's so self-involved. It is completely, how much have I written that day and how long were the pieces I wrote? If I wrote a bunch of short 3-paragraph posts and somebody sends me, and there's a video that I could include in this or a giant chart, damn right I'm going to put it in because really I haven't been making my money that day. So look, sometimes there's obviously a chart or a graphic or something that makes a lot of sense, or a video. But nonetheless, I don't think that's ever necessarily essential for the publication, at least not for us.
Yeah, I'm kind of a traditional, old-fashioned, so I actually don't do a lot of multimedia, although I think we'd like to do more. Like to do more video and do more photo gallery types of stuff, but I don't know, for me, maybe the Google ITA thing, if I didn't break that news, then I would want to know how did that deal come about, what are the interesting motivations behind it. Here's ITA, a company out of MIT. It's been around for, 10, 15 years, something like that, 12 years. How did they build that company? How did they get to the point where they could be talking to Google about this? What are the lessons learned? What mistakes did they make? What would they do differently? Who are the people behind it? So I try to dig into what's the narrative arc of that company.